Hello everyone, today we talk about something rather different from the usual. I anticipated over the last months, possibly even years, I don't remember, my intention to address the traditional meaning of sex and love. Of course, together with that, I will essentially ban entirely from the vocabulary the term gender for reasons that do not even need to be explained. And to address this topic in a very, say, also different ways than the usual one, I do want to address similarly religious topics. Because even though there is, of course, a traditional basis for what we will be explaining, and of course, like that, wisdom will come to assist us at every step of the way, I will base it fundamentally on it. In the last millennia, you cannot really say that there's been a thorough, not just doctrinal, but also in a traditional sense, but in a philosophical interest focusing much on sex and its metaphysical meaning. Another reason why it's a challenge to address these topics in the first place. In great part, of course, this content does intertwine with what we have already discussed regarding traditional religion. For example, the last video we made on the doctrine of the two natures is, of course, very much connected now to the explanation of the kind of topic, say, divisions that we're gonna make here, what we are also meaning with specific by specific terms. Another reason why I'm actually interested in this topic is that, of course, we live in a time that seemingly has, say, broken great part of our connection with the sacred in a spiritual way, and that unsurprisingly corresponds to a sort of collapse, not just in values, but in fact in the very practical reality of life. Right? If you navigate YouTube, I don't know what sort of algorithm, like what kind of cookies triggered that. Maybe if you are a married person, this is not much of an issue. But I see actually lots of videos about, say, in the feed about, if anything, divorces or this kind of, mostly post-drama / trauma experiences, etc. There is, admittedly, I don't watch actually any of this. I'm much more interested actually in true crime documentaries and stuff like that. In interviews to murders. It's sort of incredibly flat. I mean, they all sort of behave in the same way typically. Only every once in a while things get spiced up. But of course, it's fascinating because it shows you how people's psychology is really dumb in many ways, except the one, of course, of the investigators that are trained specifically to, push people in that direction. But spin-offs aside, I will not make a series about, criminal history or something like that. We already studied military history. That's bloody enough. Let's be honest. That's what the mob wants. But going back on the sentimental theme, of course, we are all aware, of stats looking at essentially people's sexual life, intended, of course, as we'll explain now. Also, and that's part of the problem. So, in the rawest, if you want, low and banal material sense, by simply, complaining. This is the kind of Richard Dawkins style, spending your entire existence complaining against religion, and all of a sudden wanting to, veer towards something that sells more at the moment, is more fashionable, and saying, but I like Christmas carols, and, I like this kind of thing. Well, congratulations, idiot, you're the one that sort of contributed to that willingly, and now you're whining about that. It seems really the epitome of the self-sabotage that we operate constantly, that we have absolutely no idea of. With sex, it's a bit like this. I mean, stats speak clearly. People don't have sex anymore. I mean, as far as I'm, concerned, of course, I will not use this series to talk about, for example, my private life. This will not be those kind of sort of unpresentable things like, it happened to me, like, I went with that woman, it happened. Like, I will not be talking about this stuff. Also, mostly because I don't want to talk about people that, I don't know, nobody knows who I am, but, that I've had at times sentimental misadventures, but let's say the misfortune more than else. But that's exactly also part of the problem. It's also about what you want and more. So we'll be talking about, however, in a general sense. I will not become your sort of sentimental life coach, your Cupid, or something like that, nor I will give you any sort of background with my personal experience as far as that is concerned. Of course, however, and this is, I think, the most interesting part of the series, is that, this is a topic that pertains so deeply and intimately and to our personal sphere rather than just a private one, and that we all come into existence through, that there are so many layers of its understanding throughout towards, of course, the most veritable traditional meaning, that it may be really sort of awakening at so many levels to understand how much we're sort of given for granted, sort of obscuring, not thinking about, simply because it seems like that this is what we've always been told, right? Having been raised like in the top of the sort of expansion of the society of abundance and whatever, like, sex is natural, don't worry, like everything, winking at you regarding that, seeming overrating, of course, the kind of lower actual sort of materialistic, in fact, a declination of the same, and not really even giving you a reason or an actual guidance or some sort of reference, etc., why this would have been such an important deal. I mean, being attracted to someone, of course, is that natural spring, but as we know, and this is a bit like the trick that we have been fed with, is that this naturality is not actually a matter of instinct or mere, in fact, physicality intended in a material sense. It is actually part of a much higher, spiritual dimension that tradition tells us that we should cultivate in very specific ways. I'm not talking about sex per se, but in this sense also the broader meaning of love and spirituality. And so the very reason and the actual will, this is especially to resonate with men, because that's actually the point. Like, we know that the highest, say, form of attraction, but in this sense it's something more. It's something that really gets down to love, and especially when you are in the clinical sort of state that is described as that literal syndrome that works by chemicals, by something happening within, and that was described actually, and for example, in Indo-European mythology in very specific and precise ways. You actually want that woman. Like, it's not something animal in the sense that, like, any other creature basically does, except man. Right, and it is this will to power, right, that eventually translates itself into the actual action. That, of course, in a fallen world is, deteriorated. There is a lot of also, say, traditional, but in with the smaller t, let's say, wisdom proverbia that talk about how every animal is said after the coitus and similar things, because it is also true. Like, there is a limit, right? That is the one that definitely pertains to this tangible world, and that's why, in many ways, without a connection with the higher one, this level of sexuality feels so squalid and unfulfilling, unsatisfactory. The traditional wisdom with capital T instead tells us that sex is the very gateway to the truth, to heaven, and not just, of course, hyperbolically, sensualistic sense, right? Unless we, of course, understand the senses as well, together with intelligence, just to remain within scholastics, for example, as a couple, as also like the natural mean to an end that, however, must be guided by a higher understanding. I'm a bit clumsy here at the beginning because this video is just, it's not that I have to frame, of course, such topic in ways that, as if it sounded like, the hard corner of Schwerpunkt, this kind of, series about, teenage crushes and all this stuff. But it is really, because first of all, this video is a real introduction. It's not even an introduction, actually. It's just a reflection on why we should be talking about this topic. That, however, must set the fundamentals right as well, right? And this is actually a spin-off. It's something they have noticed in as much as I've been publishing these videos on traditional religion, etc., that people seem to have, I don't know whether to use the term disturbing or not, but however, tendency to basically focus on this very content. I have my ideas on why this is the case. Consider that I'm primarily a military historian, right? And as such, I'm also disappointed when, for example, I make a video that it's not that I spend an excessive amount of time researching this stuff, because more or less I am into the thing and the criticism, and I can think out loud in the videos themselves. But let's say that I thought could really help people through in fact, strategic culture and military history, and say getting them somewhere where, in fact, this very topics should make them understand how politically, military and socially, like a human being can, in fact, actualize himself, and through the same action, right? I passed. In many ways, that I'm a Clausewitzian, I still have to finish the Vom Kriege commentary, etc. Like I'm still there. I'm actually preparing something for in the incoming months, talking specifically more about Clausewitzian theory, etc. But say my intuition was coupling Clausewitzian theory for how, say, the world comes to be described, not just war is explained in the essence, with this actually traditional knowledge that seems to overlap perfectly with the same intuition. So the fact that there are so many people that are more engaged into this sort of explicitly religious side of the story, and that sort of pat me on the shoulder, say, please continue with this, we want to see this, it is positive from one side, but you should always consider that there is sort of a much wider dimension that, yes, these videos may also acquaint you with, but that is mirrored throughout all my content, right? And at the same time, I see this attention towards these very topics as a desperate, as an act of desperation, like that really does. I don't know how many views this video will make, but I presume that it will actually attract a lot of attention, especially if I go on with this and it starts becoming really a quite organic series, because of the aforementioned dysfunctionality that we observe, in fact, in the world around us as far as relationships are concerned, and the relation between men and women specifically. We will not talk here about sort of the most obvious, topics that today are at the center of sort of political struggle, etc. It's not much the thing per se. We will be touching on them. The idea is, pushing away all that rubbish as far as, these are really completely, say their topics completely devoid from both sides, independently from the difference that objectively exists in merit from traditional basis. And I mean real traditional basis, not what I don't want to make names or use categories, but this thing of sex and relationship and love and etc. is very much written also by pseudo-conservatives that often act as if they were posing themselves as the spiritual guides of the situation, and actually don't even start talking about the actual deal traditionally, nor they actually seem to have the courage to say things out loud when they should be said, for how sort of controversial they shouldn't actually be, but they would be in that context because they sort of care about their following, their face, their image. As you know, I don't give a damn about that because I don't have such a thing. I have, yes, more than 20,000 subscribers. And of course, I do care about what I say also because it gets continuously misunderstood. And that's the thing that, if anything, I'm not bothered because people out there attribute me wrong concepts that they have misunderstood, that I don't believe in, that I haven't said, etc. I'm actually much worse than I seem, right? In the conventional sort of, say at least what is the disgustingly standard political standard, I am that evil, right? I have fangs, I have claws, right? And I don't give a damn, believe me. I am way beyond it at this point of my life. Things like mercy or, any kind of pity or whatever. No, I'm actually a sensitive person. And the truth is, of course, that this series is also because I'm a romantic person myself, more or less. But the truth is really that I do think that these videos can be, if they get that larger amount of views, an important instrument to sort of attract followers, views, watch length, etc. Also, as far as the other topics are concerned. I don't want to transform this channel into a sort simply, traditional, doctrinal, sort of emanatistic power, something like that. But hey, there is nothing really wrong about that, and I will keep being a military historian. Just, part of my background is history of religion. As such, I sort of began to explore. Also, again, starting, as I said before, from military history, it began like that. The moral dimension of in military struggle, right, and the motivation of the political direction, right, and that really unavoidably brings you here and sort of gives life to otherwise a history that would seem that empty. And this is exactly what, when talking about sex, you have to bear in mind. I made that video about the doctrine of the two natures, in which I explained that there is a tangible world and an intangible world. And so what we mostly understand as sex, that has almost been loaded as a word with this, not dirty, but it's just a low word of some sort. Right? Either it sounds very, uncomfortably scientific, or just very sort of squalid in that sense. Well, that's the tangible world. That's the world that you have been you've been habituated to think of, at least through the kind of subcultural references that you've been habituated with. You also know how, of course, miserable sexual life can be for anyone. Nothing is perfect really as you imagine it could or would be. You always have that sort of dream that the perfect person, or at least the one you can make things work perfectly, comes about. And that is actually instead the gateway, like the direction at least, towards that intangible dimension, right? So, as you know, that dimension of the intangible also holds the fundamental principles and meanings, and this is what we are here to really explore and study really carefully. So, of course, along this path, what we will be hinged on are the two sexes and their relationship, right? You cannot really, right? There are no other parameters whatsoever, and we'll explain why this is the case. And also about this, I don't need to add anything for the sort of new generations, sadly raised with, say, doctrines that are just mental disturbances. In any case, and this is not to deny or think that, of course, I'm relatively literate, scientifically speaking. Of course, like, other things can happen, but it's not really like the ideologies hijacking that are a completely different story. But the most important thing here is, given that we're looking at the metaphysical side of the story, getting down to the fundamentals and the absolute standpoint. I think that even before beginning, as I was saying before, if you ever have really fallen in love in your life, it happened only twice to me, by the way. So it's something very rare, at least in my experience. And I see people really, especially, like, I talk mostly to girls, unavoidably, and that is like, it happens often, like, to hear, like, oh yes, I love that guy, or these kind of things, and then you, because I'm a bit sadistic, and I ask, but are you sure that you actually love? How what did that mean? How did you feel? Do you know that falling in love feels like consuming heroin and being addicted to that? And I realized that it seems to me that it's not much that people are also not having much sex in the first place, which is not even just the problem, but of course how that happens, at least they should have when they are, with the right person at that point, that it should happen, and also very frequently. But the point there is that people do not, that's the spiritual foundation of the problem, do not seem to be actually capable of willing, as I was saying before, as far as their moral dimension is basically exhausted, is basically dried out, right? I noticed in my experience, in fact, that, say, love is stronger in a way when you realize that, let's say, the depth to which, like, that person is matching with you, right, is compatible with you. And so thinking, like, I'm talking at least to people who are apparently interested in history, like, imagine you're very, very passionate about history, and you leave this, like, in your studies, in your readings, you're like a person who really loves the past, loves visiting monuments, really likes thinking about this. Just imagine what a blessing it is just to meet someone, and that behaviorally, habitudinally, that also shares that, right? If you, like, date the girl that, I don't know, is just in, okay, I don't want to be evil, but saying something terrible still, like, I am into, macroeconomical data. Okay, that could in theory be, I also was in theory towards that direction, or things like, I don't know, that legitimately have nothing, but I mean nothing to do. Those fields are very, say, almost scientific ones that basically exclude, just in great part because of their same existence and historical knowledge. Like, it's difficult to establish, like, very strong foundation unless there is, of course, a very, in fact, deeper bond. Of course, I'm partly joking regarding to this, but let's say I was making this example because what intertwines morally, what, say, makes you, for example, aware through history of tradition, right? And you don't find in others, can hardly, in fact, bring you anywhere. Like, if it is not met, if it's not on the horizon, right? And so this is actually a very serious problem. There is a level of materialism and of nihilism that, of course, is the result of a very specific ill will to eradicate tradition, history, spirituality, the attention towards the moral forces, out of the equation, because they found out that if you do so, people have nothing to live, to love for, right? And they're objectively being dried up. They are empty. That's also the reason why I think that actually most conservatives today do not even understand that they're not really conservatives at all, right? And even the very concept of conservatism shouldn't be a sort of crystallization to something that has to be conserved just through, let's say, what is that has to be conserved at least? Just exterior, say, behaviors, or some stamps on something, or some badges that tell you that you are part of that team or another. It should be about actually breaking through, like all the constriction of the fall of mankind, right? And again, tradition tells us that love in sexual relationship is exactly aimed to this, with an incredibly high level of sacredness, which is in fact the one that generates new life. Is so crucial in the entire, if you want, it's the single most important thing, beyond which literally anything else loses any relevance. But as we will see, this has nothing to do with the sort of, again, green light. It's all natural. It's it's all normal, and which was actually the same language used by the people who sort of liberalized, so we can say, sex in that, say, disgustingly empty and evil materialistic way, exactly knowing how to sabotage, in fact, the mentally feeble as far as that is concerned. Because, of course, if you teach a person to be like just a dirty animal, this is exactly how the ranks of mankind will start being sparser, right? In fact, this is the point. It's not just about creating life, right? This is just the, in fact, tangible world. It's the substantial one, if you want. Then you have to give a form to it, right? And as we will see, actually, sex can generate, and does generate, monstruosity. A monstruosity which is contained in the level of fall of mankind that passes on genetically the burden of sin, and so the literal genetic degeneration throughout the same childbearing. And this is why we actually carry all, like, the sins of our ancestors over ourselves. And of course, there are some people coming to the world that this is the actual important distinction, that, let's say, have a potential, but of course will, and so we celebrate sort of exteriorly this idea that okay, let's hope this is going to be a good person, and eventually, like, we'll see when this person goes to the grave 80 years later, that potential will have transformed into the act, and then it will have been over. Like, I mean, that shot is over. And then you will judge that, and you will see, was it actually positive that this person existed, right? And who knows, because nobody really knows to the fullest the answer, right? Unless you're God yourself. And of course, this person may have been, for example, a terrible person, but may have generated other people. And maybe these people turn out to be, after all, good for our Lord. But at the same time, we shouldn't fool ourselves either regarding the fact that as far as we are fallen and human, unfortunately, also sex is rigged by that. And actually, there is, now we'll see it through the series, because it's actually, say, it's not that complicated, but there must be an introduction to it. The moment of conception is also a moment of decision that literally determines what the new born will be. And that tradition, and actually what science has been essentially realizing in the last decades, is that, of course, there is definitely an influence that behavior has, genetically speaking. It's also, like, this is a more complicated issue, but we will address this too as well. In any case, the point is that, of course, humanity, and we explained this in many other videos, is not currently in a state of re-elevation. If anything, we're heading towards, like, the ultimate exhaustion and moral collapse. and emptiness, as far as properly the human quality, the few positive that mankind had in merit of the single individuals, which is not meaning that there aren't great forces agitating, or that civilization hasn't sort of progressed, but there is a sense of tiredness, there is a sense of lack of values, of exhaustion. It's in many ways just, again, an illusion, right? But it is wanted. It's not somebody else's fault, it's your fault, right? And you perfectly know why it is the case. That is the same reason why, let's be frank, like you do not engage yourself into a positive relationship, right? Because you may have standards, you may be waiting for, say, what is called like the right person. Waiting is not a good idea, should be getting out there and chasing that. But there are some things that you cannot sort of get rid of. You prefer to be a bit more relaxed, you prefer to be a bit more on your own, a bit less under pressure. And so time passes and still things do not happen. Humans are made to procreate just in their early decades of existence. And then that's a great part of the reason why things do not go where they really should. Now, as we were saying before, how can we even start this series? As I said at the beginning, we do not actually have a great deal of doctrinal evidence for approaching the traditional wisdom of sex, so that we really have to go into through secondary paths to actually very big deal of concepts that we have found also elsewhere, but realizing why they are connected to love and this kind of state. Plato talks about it. The Renaissance got interested once again into it through the same Neoplatonism, and if you want, also exalting a bit more like the humanistic, physicistic side of the story. Then, of course, there are, you can find, of course, a lot of references to that. But as you will see, it's not like we're talking references to sex that the word is plenty of, has always been, but rather something more theoretical, right? Something that can really fix what's the deal as far as the tangible, beyond the tangible nature is concerned. Schopenhauer talked about that. We will go by steps. What really characterizes, however rare the times in which we live that for this series seem like more relevant, because this is hopefully going to be useful, is realizing how far we have, as we were saying before, how many layers we've put between ourselves and sex, and in general, how much we have detached ourselves as a consequence from our self-actualization. So, as you know, from the contestation, from emancipation, whatever you want to define it, there has been an incredible inflation of sex in every sense, right? And this has, of course, ruined heavily its nature, right? Sex has been approached from various perspectives. Anthropology, people have studied essentially how in different societies in history, men and women interrelated to one another, and how, say, generally speaking, this took, and this is what anthropology is sort of more or less dividing, showing things like, look, in this society was like this and that, so contributing to pretend that it's not much that specific human, say, level of fall, or whichever other external influence on the system that was making people at times behaving in relatively different ways, but that there was something intrinsically sort of exchangeable, modifiable, or basically empty about sex itself. Biology hasn't given either, right? The idea is that if anything gets down to mechanisms or how just things happen in a material sense. You can explain like to children on school books how flowers and bees really work in a very sort of cold, abstract way, just for your biology class, and then going on with that. That's at least informative as far as the science of it is hopefully correct, and there isn't too much pollution from matter, or any for that matter. At least in my school books it was the case, still fortunately, like that for strange ideologies. Sex has been approached, of course, like also sociologically, which means let's study how often people have sex, or let's say, this kind of stats by saying, this thing kind of just exists, but what is interesting is how it sort of affects other fields fundamentally. So detaching ever more from sex itself. Eugenic. Now, eugenic is very interesting because, of course, it's been investigated in so many different fields, medicine, but also just take philosophy at many levels. Think about the doctrine of race, think about the Holocaust, think about segregation in countries like the United States or Sweden, even during the same World War II. So that at least triggered some moral issues. Like they started to make people, if anything, reflect on the value of people, right, of human beings. But still, again, it didn't really affect much sex. Of course, there were ways, again, in which people were prevented to have sex, were sterilized, etc. But it's still mostly the end of this mean that matters, rather than, in fact, sex itself was, in this sense, especially, regulated from the external. And then, of course, there is sort of the most famous aspect of all, that is psychoanalysis, right? And mostly, at least sadly, because of the leftistic structuralistic prevalence in the world after World War II, especially, amplified in that way, it's not much the Jungian side of psychoanalysis that sort of struck popular culture as far as sex and its meaning was concerned, but the Freudian one, which is, in many ways, again, you can't study such things without either of the two, as tradition tells us concretely. But again, the idea is that sex was depicted some sort of animal instinct that maybe even just in the Jungian sense passed through the masses most in its neurotic aspect, and so the negative, the deterior ones. And there was also, like, in this sense, a rape itself of it. Let's skip even all the twisted criminal experiments carried out on children for this unprejudiced, like, sort of idea that, again, everything is flexible, and or except, again, you can't force that on children as well. So there are certain stories that are terrifying, and that in that sense mostly awake your homicidal instincts, just because I was still thinking about the true crime series. But in fact, you don't see much of that. If anything, the contrary, that there are very, say, fucked up people who do very fucked up things on children and other human beings, that definitely show that if you're not right in the head, there is always a component of evil, right? This is not to stigmatize mental illness per se, but definitely if you're not well, there is something that does not work, and so you have to fix it. And sadly enough, like, the centrality of sex does bring, in especially those people who are more, they are less developed, are more diseased and malaise, and talking in that anthropological and sociological sense, unfortunately, that higher degree of rape or violence of any kind of, it doesn't even have to be physical, right? It can't be something that really traumatizes you mentally, and as far as people treat others, dysfunctional families, right? Divorce and abuse, and these are things that children witness all the time. And we say, okay, well, that just happens sadly, but it's literally one of the worst things ever, right? I fortunately have never witnessed trauma in my life. I've never had, I've had always a pretty united family and functional model, etc. But I realize, and life is tough just by itself. Imagine being brought up in a context that literally demolishes you, the person that you are, even at something so intimate, even just in the model that, again, your father and your mother set. If you have both, by the way, which is also the other huge issue. But we're not going to talk much about this for that matter. Just know that evidently sex is central in Erotic, and obviously by far transcends the physical aspect as well. Now, I insisted on this list because I wanted to show you how much sex has been discussed and also rendered available in, for example, conservatives fixate now much on the problem of pornography, saying, oh my God, pornography is evil. So, it's the most fundamental traditional wisdom that if you are weak to depend on something external from you, the problem is you, right? It's not that if you're going to be seduced by evil externally, oh my God, you're a victim of the situation. It's just going to be used as an excuse that by those same insults that complain about the terrible world, the terrible women and whatever, and that are actually just a bunch of lazy asses with deeply unresolved mental problems that now somebody cries for because, oh my God, they are too addicted to porn. They addicted to porn because they're fucked up in the end as well, right? And nobody has the courage of saying that too, right? Remember that in tradition, in theory, in a strict sense, nothing is completely off limit. It depends what sort of metaphysical meaning it has, right? And just an idiot that spends his life just, watching porn is just an idiot for himself. And if porn did not exist, there would be still something way worse in the globe that you can't blame. Remember when they told us that video games fucked up our brains, right? This is maybe how Schwerpunkt has been born on YouTube. Not quite, but it could be as well. Well, it shows that, of course, there is nothing about that. That, of course, if you are an ill person and you're exposed to violence, to evil, etc., you can twist that and use it and incentivize you to do that, but it's still your head that did that. It's not an external thing that did so. Without mentioning, by the way, that if porn was only the only problem, like sexually speaking, nowadays, what about the completely empty sexual life of people, or even and I don't mean the one that they don't have, but the one they have as well, right? How women throw away their virginity just like that, or how, in fact, men feel miserable for that in hindsight, and I would say there's nothing really much advantageous. Like relationships, if anything, make you grow, but it's not sex in its physicality that really makes you grow per se. Especially, I think, for a man, there's not really much of a difference that it makes ever in the first place. I wish I had not had relationships, say, for that reason, but I also understand that I grew through relationships, so at least the human connection was important. It's just sex wasn't important, especially when you don't really love the person. Now, there is also, and I was joking a bit throughout the video regarding this fact that there are people now that apparently are like some sort of sex coaches of some sort, which is sort of weird. This is like explaining how to, I don't know, cool water, right? What is a sexologist supposed to be? Right, the person who tells you how to have sex, like it's not even just sex education in a general sense, but a person who assists you during your sexual life. I thought that was called. Well, okay, I that's better. I don't make the joke because that would be too heavy. Because I'm sure that there is some good will even among these people. But we have to be serious. These are not professions. These are jokes. And unless you're a psychiatrist, you're a doctor, it is really something serious like that. Otherwise, I don't think any person needs to hire a sexologist. And regarding the hiring, you understand what kind of bad joke I wanted to do before. Now, metaphysics is central in this, right? Because it sort of throws out all this utter rubbish and poses you in front of the sort of wonder that sex constitutes. After all, that seems to be almost like the most important thing, as we were saying before, that moves people. Like, the reason why we exist is that we were conceived and we were born. And it seems that once we're past, like, the ultimate point of our life continuity, and so our hope of a metaphysical life continuing does lay in having passed your genes on to another person that sort of contains you existentially and carries on where you have left. And that's also where all the parental duty comes from, where all the let's say the necessity of specific figures in upbringing stem from. The ultimate meaning of sex and love, I will title it sex because I would like to stress also it's a bit like why I talk about military history as well. Tradition says that, of course, it's the action in many ways that counts more than anything, and that this let's say all this experience can serve to awaken your spiritual awareness. And as you know, well, through things like, sacred, say the sacrality of unions in general, but there were things as, say, the sensualistic Pelagian chthonic dimension, going as far as sacred prostitution, right? With temples dedicated to that, etc. Doesn't seem to have been properly interested the contemporaries, because I think that the actual attitude is like saying, okay, well, if I'm fertile and healthy and and I look adequate, I can't simply hope at least to have a relationship. That's sort of my business, and I'm up to it in my private life, and sort of I have fun with that, right? And so I don't need to talk about it with people. I don't need, fortunately, of course. But at the same time, this is yet another behavior that brings you to detach yourself from the actual question, what does sex mean metaphysically? What the sexes mean metaphysically? The relation between man and woman mean metaphysically? I will avoid, of course, to talk about what other scholars thought. Again, there is probably not too much to say about it as well, because it doesn't seem to me that there's been much of a traditional investigation as a standard, right, to approach the issue, right? So it does sound bad, but let's say, as I made just a couple of clean examples already about it, there is an empirical and more narrowly human aspect that can help as a shared condition getting there. As much as there is that sense of distortion that the pathological consequences of a wrong sexual conduct can really lead towards. I cannot stress this enough. Again, I already said it, but I don't want this content to be anything like, oh yes, kids, get out there, let's celebrate sex. This has literally nothing to do with that. That's the sensualistic, communistic, disgusting aspect of the whole thing, right? Sex is meant to be sacred in tradition, and this is the most important thing that we should bear in mind. love has been studied as well, and so much. Who hasn't read Romeo and Juliet or The Sorrows of the Young Werther, etc.? Love is, if you want, like the most dominating force in culture, which fortunately does reflect what it's really meant traditionally to be regarding the universe and the truth. So you understand that this series, by of course being connected with love but concentrating on sex, has specifically an instrumental purpose, right? We will be looking at love that has really like this, in tradition, this enormous task. Like it's literally being said, there's like in the European myths, that there is a seed, small, like a very small one, that from the art of man can sort of essentially invest all of the sudden, from a moment to another, the entire universe with its force. This is the divine spark that exists within us, right? Remember, this is a spiritual seed, right? And it is as strong in this sense as God, right? And can transfigure the universe entire. This is beautiful. I wish I had sort of, we will talk about love, so don't, if you're disturbed by the word sex, of course, like I could maybe make some arrangement, because I know that it's not maybe like a, in a relaxed, right, reflection, maybe the word that you want always to throw around, there is some, not taboo aspect, but at least in conventional language, especially if you're prudish, and you're habituated not to talk about sex. Believe me, I'm not habituated to talk about sex at all, but can have you like uncomfortable in that regard. At the same time, I want to be provocative a bit, so it still serves its purpose intellectually. But of course, love goes in parallel with that, and it couldn't be otherwise. Otherwise, you have just, this is the point, you could argue that there is a metaphysical love, right, in a physical sex, right? So sex as the gateway to full love, like, and first, hopefully, like, love being already there, motivating your actions. In any case, the most sort of also in this aspect of love, psychology has been the most useful mean to analyze love, mostly as an emotion, in fact, right? This is what Stendhal, Bourget, Balzac, and others have done, right? And you can see how, in fact, also in contemporary history, this love has been, the sentiment of love has been twisted together with the malaise, the inner malaise of the individual. Think about Thomas Mann or other authors that describe like a moral corruption that, of course, comes to invest also with like the sexual aspect as a craze, as a sort of, in fact, not really love, right? And as such, something that really actually divorces the person. It doesn't make them go anywhere. Here there is a very important conceptual aspect to bear in mind that, especially from a male perspective, is so crucial. The entire point of love is for man to dominate it, right? It may seem strange, but there are useful examples of this. In an empirical way, remember, like, I don't know, in a cultural depiction, when a man falls in love and he's under this kind of spell, that he becomes almost ridiculous, right? He is sort of too sweet. It's as if he had effeminated himself, literally, by falling in love, which may seem paradoxical. This is exactly the product of time. We have the other men mocking him. Oh, look at this guy, he's not a man anymore, he's smitten over that woman, but at the same time he behaves in a sort of also pathetic way for which he's mocked legitimately. Well, the entire point of love is to be tamed, to be dominated, right? What at that point you experience as love there is not much the metaphysical side, is the sensual one, the somatic one that is, again, chemically triggered. you do really behave like that. And while you are in it, if nobody has really told you anything about it, and or you maybe have been in love, you already were in love at some point, and it happens to you again, but without traditional doctrine, you may not suspect that your actual point in there is to actually suffer that much as it does, if you're not reciprocated. But even when you're in that relationship, not to indulge into the merely sort of instinctual side of the story. I'm not talking specifically about sex, but any kind of whim, any kind of sort of emotion of paranoia or sort of hate that you may feel. If saying, I don't know, your lover does something that you don't like because maybe you've just met her and you're starting just to discover her, that in fact you're supposed to tame that. You're supposed, as a man, to pick this incredibly violent feeling that really awakens those forces of the universe and tame it. To the point that you will keep loving this woman, but you will do it in a way that you can show her that you're responsible and that you're not bent by anything. And that you will simply pursue your will to power to own her. Men are not habituated to handle that anymore, right? I also experienced it myself. There was a point in which I was not aware of these doctrines, and it happened to me, and I actually behaved like I instinctively. There is something to it in manliness that does tell you to, hold, right? And women are, by the way, terribly attracted to that. Because they also feel like maybe insecure themselves, but that's the female side of the story. In fact, it has that purpose. And you shouldn't be the one to behave like that. And in fact, if you do, the woman will not like you. Of course, there are all kinds of, twisted situations, but as I said before, here we're not talking about the fallen world, even though the fallen world does respond exactly on average to these mechanisms, and we know it well throughout all those disciplines. But there is a universal, there is a metaphysical achievement to accomplish that involves that kind of manly behavior. It's like I made a video about the, taming the female demon of victory that has to do with holy war and the soul of chivalry, and actually the entire purpose of the Valkyries, of the angel-like woman. It's just like taming the Furies, right? The female deities of the underworld, the sensual aspects, the instincts, the fear, etc., the insecurity, and crushing that in holy combat in the face of death that triggers that, and this woman will be transfigured in the most beautiful angel ever and will bring you to heaven, to belong to the firmament of heroes, right? So in a relationship, this is exactly what men and women are meant to accomplish together, right? They have to create essentially something that is complete and higher as a monad than, of course, the sum of both, right? Just think how degradingly frequent it is nowadays to have again, men and women that act as if they were monads. They all have their lives, their job, or at least, okay, they don't even have a job much because of will, etc. But they want to have, in fact, their own world, their own space, and just meeting to have sex just to feel confirmed in the most vile, squalid, and inconclusive, and of course, in natural way, and just eventually doing nothing and not even having children, not even continuing the relationship, and at that point, why even bothering having one in the first place, right? At that point, don't have it entirely. The concept, of course, that you're creating something that is more important than the same individual is completely alien to any of the beliefs that you have been forcefully imposed by so-called modernism and secularism. It's actually communism and materialism, and so pure evil incarnated, expressly designed to destroy your existence, also starting from your sex down to the level, also the entire racial issue, everything that basically the left has chased, has used to lure, right, the conservatives down the rabbit hole for no reason whatsoever, as if we should even ever think that the Fourth Estate has any sort of relevance whatsoever with this insanity. And of course, there is a Fourth Estate that evolves into the third one, at least upgrades and abandons much of this nonsense. But It's always been there, and it was not even ever meant to have any relevance. That's the entire point of why sin is evil. That because you're basically giving way to something that's not even supposed to be a power or a force whatsoever. All right? And you are feeding that for no reason whatsoever. That's what the sacrality of love and life actually mean, right? And again, starting from sex, from sort of liberalizing it, from sort of pretending that there must not be any kind of conduct. You can't impute anyone about it for no reason whatsoever, even if it is hurtful, even if it is damaging, even if it is miserable. Like that is, simply, of course, undermining the same person's nature and gradually eroding it that way. So through the excuse of giving a chance to everyone unlimitedly, you're actually destroying the entire humanity in the process. What could we talk about this? Love, we're talking love, and so this is also often understood as a joke sometimes. Like at the end of the day, what is this sort of love representation in culture or subculture, if not some sort of varying sequences of emotional and romantic experiences that actually do not lead anywhere, if not to misunderstandings, to confines, that do not even start questioning what is exactly this all about. Isn't there something fundamental, something that goes beyond the material side? The metaphysical aspects are way more interesting, because this is not about saying, I was about to say beyond the physicality, but of course the physis has a very specific purpose, and so that's also why eventually, like, if humans exist, it's because sex keeps existing in some functional way, and so this witnesses to, of course, like himself, that there is a will to power, etc. It's just ever less logical and regulated and disciplined and really understood for what it's supposed to be. I will not spend also much time explaining here what we mean by metaphysics. Of course, as I was just saying, you could think it's beyond the physical world, but it's not really, because it eliminates it, right? But because the physical world at that point sort of goes beyond. So it's not some strange abstraction or philosophical speculation that we're referring to here, right? We're talking about something that transcends the purely physical, because it goes beyond it, right? And actually elevating the same physicality in the process. So it's something, again, beyond psychology, beyond physiology. It's really, again, here I'm not to convince you about anything. I will just be expressing a doctrine, historically and religiously founded, so with evidence and with actual foundation. But of course, it involves like the acceptation of a higher realm, a higher order of things, and for which I send you to, I don't know yet whether, I'll likely create a playlist for this on its own, because, mixing it with history of religion, it could be a thing technically, but it's also a lazy way of going. So we'll transcend even the soul-body dichotomy. It's not all there is, right? The soul-body dichotomy reflects essentially what you experience, right, in this world. And in order to understand the traditional meaning of sex, you have to transcend this same soul-body condition at the moment. This is extremely important because, as you understand, this is absolutely nothing to do with any sense of let's separate soul and body. That's agnostic heresy. This is nothing to do with, in fact, like I even refuse myself to digress in the sort of most disgusting ideologies that are circulating today that are just pure nothingness. They are basically based on pure wishful thinking, whinery, victimism, and emotionalism, and no accomplishments whatsoever. That's actually how and why that they shouldn't even be considered to actually destroy them. In any case, the transcendence of the wall into a superior status, that's exactly what, of course, tradition deals with, right? It's a transcendent aspect of human existence. This is surely very unfamiliar with most people. So that's why I said I don't have to really convince anyone, because of all the approaches that, as we've seen, sex has been observed from, have barely anything to do with that. I mean, it's part of the world. It's not that, like, just for the fact that they're investigating it, even just tangentially, it's like they don't get anything from it, but it's just like a sort of overthinking of how to categorize other things that more or less have also nothing to do with the entire concept. It's just the most straightforward way to what the hell is sex in the first place, and what absolute meaning it holds. All right, just here it's not about the like this sort of ghostly sort of dimension that you have to magically believe in just out of wishful thinking. This is, compared to the others, this is just literally what all the others stem from, like in the history of mankind, scientifically and philosophically. And so if you don't look at those, it's barely anything we can do. See, anthropology has studied this also for sexual relations in societies, also for religious reasons. There is also in sociological studies, attentions to communities and their beliefs and why they behave like the way they do. And the same biology tells us about those physiological aspects of the world. So it's as if they had broken down the thing to pieces and habituated you to fixate on why do we consider these pieces even separately, not why this is part of a higher wisdom in the first place. There is also a very important say thing to gain from this, aside from this topic, because it teaches you to not just to make this effort of thinking about transcendental consciousness, but realizing why our, say, fallen sexuality is actually miserable in its restraints. It helps you loosening the same constraints of your individual ego. If you don't do that, if you keep seeing sex, for example, as just a way to confirm your own self, because you actually know, it's as if, by having sex sort of randomly, scoring, points or whatever, this just made you feel as if you were not aging and dying without having accomplished anything, not knowing how to handle a higher truth and a greater responsibility and a greater accomplishment. You will always, you will essentially degenerate. You will keep on destroying yourself. All right, so this, say, path aims at making, say, you emerge from some pretty dark abyss up to some higher awareness, and this is why we make our history of religion content in the first place. Speaking of that empirical experience, there is I think no doubt that through the deepest feelings of eros, a unique, it's even difficult how to explain this, can be defined as a rhythm, emerges, right? There is something really powerful about it that you can immediately understand, like there is a level of captivation, which is also what drives you into it. And there is intuitable experience, as we were saying before, like a sinful dimension. I've heard some conservatives, strangely, like those people again that have to show off, that they say, no, I believe everything is perfect in my life because I follow these rules and everything is fine. No, there is not such a thing. Others, for example, are more mature and claim things like, I don't know, when I make love with my wife, everything is pure, is perfect, is heaven. There is no, there is sin. You're human beings, right? If you're not God, there is no action that you can do without sin whatsoever, right? This is not because it's sex and it has anything better or worse about it at all. Like, I'm not making the point because it's sex, it's some sort of squalid thing at all. It's humanity that is a squalid thing, right? And you have to really fix this in your brains if you want even to begin to hope to pretend to know anything remotely about tradition, right? This disgusting, narcissistic teaming, like saying, I am the special guy who, does everything perfect and belongs to just the club of the people who found out how to do perfect things. Like, that's the first indicator of sin. Like, these people have a specific circle in hell for them. And the sense there is that, of course, there is a lot of contrast in the erotic experience, because you have captivation, as we've seen, but then there is something rewarding about it. Like in this call, right? It's not an illusion, right? It's mixed, right? There is an elevation, right? There is something grander. There's something noble in it. It's sort of strange how even, like everyone can be elevated by this. It's not to say, again, that the sexual encounter is, necessarily just an achievement for that matter. Maybe this is just a one night stand in, I don't know, in a club bathroom, and then the girl gets pregnant and maybe gets an abortion, and the father that just doesn't give a fuck. Like, that's how unfortunately reality works at so many levels, and that's the monster that you create, right? These are objectively lesser human beings, and we should especially treat them as such. But in the action itself, in the act itself, in what it's at stake at the moment, right, there is that potential for elevation. Everything is both in act and potential to some extent, right, differently, but that is arguably the most important one. Excuse me, I drink a little. There is, especially from an empirical point of view, and I think this cannot say, as men, we can give our side of the story and women can give their one, but definitely for men there's a very specific moment that is also even dangerous, a moment of total abandonment, right? We think more physically, of course, the woman opening up, right? But it's actually the man that opens up as well, right? And women we know that they're biologically designed for being very sensorially alert, right? When man sort of blacks out at last, because that's the moment in which, also in the sagas, in mythology, etc., you know that's in which the jealous partner arrives and kills the guy, because he is literally at that point giving himself totally to the woman, so he gives his virility to the woman. It's as if, it's the story of Alboin with the sword tied to the marriage bed that is at the most vulnerable at that point. And what that means is actually very scary, even, because It's as if that moment momentarily halted the ordinary capacities of the individual. And this is true for the woman, I presume, albeit in different ways. This means actually a contact with the beyond, right? The mere reason that we use in a sort of lay fashion, right? At that point, zeros, right? And we know that, right? Which is also the reason why so many people are actually born against the rational will of their parents, and that will hopefully welcome them properly in the world. It's a craze in many ways, because it's not much the instinct doesn't tell you to hold, but like a higher will, like some greater need of fulfillment and accomplishment that is exactly that moment that projects you towards like almost a vision, right? It's as if like reality bent on the base of this, right? It's as if an alternate reality unfolded, right? A phenomenon that definitely has been recognized and experienced throughout history. And this is not just about sex, this is of course about love. As we were saying before, I don't know, what happens when you fall in love is terrifying, right? Just physiologically speaking, you are truly addicted. There is some chemical cocktail storming your brain and making you see things really in a different way. It's something I discussed also because, for example, it affected my view of military history at that point. Like, it's as if, speaking of that sort of sensuality permeating you and making you sort of less harsh and cold, I honestly felt enormously, and I got moved and teared up, etc. Because I thought of all this, I don't know, these soldiers I talk about in battles and wars that are getting massacred, etc. Like, looking at certain ones of these episodes in history and sort of breaking down, like to some extent, of thinking about their mothers, thinking about their, say, this more truly sentimental connections that are sort of widened, amplified by your condition, right? When that ends, it takes normally like, I don't know, a year and a half, something like that. You come back cold, you come back cynical. There's something from the male side definitely more sociopathic and psychopathic. Like, it's a bit of the reason why we are more interested in military history tendentially, right? It's a matter of hormones, and especially if you are sort of crazed a bit sadistically like me, with thinking about the art of war as, say, how to kill large numbers of people in effective ways, which does sound that bad, right? It's not like that ends, by the way. It's just that you start feeling within as if like you were in another condition, you were somewhere else, and you could feel the alteration of your body within, like all the sensations find Britain. If you've never fallen in love in music, in literature, all of a sudden you say, I now understand that. That's why I was talking about this, because it's exactly what is happening to me right now. And it's, again, to some extent, it's beautiful, of course, but it as always, that's the point of the video, double-edged sword, right? It's also terrible. But it's, in that sense, properly combining the Dionysian and the Apollonian. Remember that video about the way of the left hand, the way where the fire of death blazes? In other words, if you don't get burned, you can't really learn anything, let alone handling this situation. And as I was saying before, the actual duty of the man is to handle this emotion, having it within himself, but still navigating through his unaltered will towards the destination. There's a beautiful example mythologically in this, in the Aeneid, when Aeneas leaves the Carthaginian queen, Leto, and she is the symbol instead of course, of the feminist, say the sensualistic female side of the story. She kills herself because of she's overwhelmed by the heartbreak and of course also the shame because they had slept together. Instead, Ines knows that he has to go to found Rome, that there is all like God has wanted this, and there is no way, and he simply realizes that for this temporary moment of sensuality with Dido, he could essentially redeem himself and just be almost psychopathically cold to a way that if you read the Aeneid and you have not been properly indoctrinated to the purest traditional wisdom, you probably do not understand. You'll think that this guy is just an a-hole. No, it is not. It is exactly what he is supposed to be for a higher good. All right? Except he failed to that extent. It shows you also how dangerous that female principle that Carthage also represented. It's all the history of Rome in the Virgilian legend, etc. After the Punic Wars, really embodied. And it shows you even in that grandiose poem how central the force of sensuality really is, and how even the greatest of heroes can be led astray. This is a very, and of course he has a way to redeem himself, and it's as brutal as still just in the cosmic order of nature, which is not that you should, of course, abuse of this. You shouldn't get in that situation in the first place. But remember that also for everyone who makes a mistake, there is a chance of redemption. Right? This is very important for anyone. And my channel is very harsh sometimes, but maybe the more romantic team today always remember that tradition contemplates the possibility of fixing. Okay? So you can't change what happens, but you can fix it to some extent. At least it's incredibly difficult. It's liminally impossible. I don't want to crush you again, but that's in line of principle exactly what the same love actually means. That's why in religion, love and redemption are so deeply associated, because if you nail the right point, and it's all about your full devotion, commitment, and dedication, well, you truly understand what that is supposed to mean. Of course, yes, not fully to a divine level of truth awareness, but still to a shocking degree by human standards. We can really say that love is the strongest force in the universe. If you have really felt, that your brain is wired at that point to a way that could make you move mountains in the process. And it is, again, also scary because you may never know what this actually goes. Like it can take very dark turns. One problem, one layer, again, to surpass at least in this is, again, in the same double-edged sword sense, meaning that in order to understand the deeper significance beyond the emotions and sensations surrounding them, you must finally tune with your sensitivity, right, to be able to see beyond it, right? And that's why, again, most people just engage into sensualism, the way of the left hand, the Dionysian craze, and there is some, again, functionality to that, but only if it is mixed with some higher knowledge. Otherwise, you can repeat that, but if there is no Apollonian dimension, you're basically not going to achieve anything. And there is also like a very strange set of feelings set in the circumstances regarding relationships in general. It's as if, much of the fantasies that we cultivate at in front of the actual prospect of a concrete relationship, etc., make you feel in very strange ways. Maybe you like very much someone, in fact, from that physical point of view, but you realize, I know that I don't want to spend the rest of my life with this person. I could, yes, have sex with her, but then what, right? What would I actually gain from it? It's potentially dangerous. Like, at least if you have other plans for your life, it's not much about just ending in pregnancy, but also sexually transmitted diseases or whatever. Okay, let's eliminate this for now. But in general, right, the idea that this relationship may not actually be the best for you in general, it's something that you immediately perceive, in part because of the involvement, the tension that mounts up behind these things, and in part also because there is some sense of higher morality, at least for those who have it, for those who feel it, right? I had the chance, for example, of betraying my second ex multiple times with women that I knew from years and that wanted to be with me. But one, I had respect for my ex that unfortunately I did not love. And again, I feel terribly sorry about it. It was a mistake. That's how much like you can't feel about this. Terrific person. She was amazing. And she's a person I really admire and respect still today. A reason for which I could never betray her. Secondly, even though I liked those women physically, I knew that they weren't right for me. I would have not really been able to have, for example, the kind of relationship I had with my ex. In this sense, was much better than them. And that I also didn't expect it would sort of remain in a relationship with, because at the end of the day, the relationship felt well. There was some sense, again, of manhood and womanhood that were playing together successfully, even though there wasn't love, and so the thing eventually faded. But, at least it was a much better place to be than with that other option. And frankly, even when I was single, like this sense of just engaging just one night stands did happen as a chance, but I refused because I didn't think it was the right thing. I would have sort of felt unfulfilled by that. I would have deluded the person. Especially women tend to be, in my experience, insecure to the point that like they always try to sort of hope that you can reassure them instead about the fact that you like them, whatever. It's really terrible to take advantage of them like that. I talked with women who told me that they had at some point, like the usual thing, women sometimes do it like for revenge. They have sex with, I don't know, someone, like the first one they find, and then they feel utterly miserable. And so it's definitely a shared wisdom and awareness and reality that's you see how simple it is, like how things should, like just the same biology of it tells you that this is not how it's supposed to work, right? And how it's not going to work. And so it's difficult sometimes even to talk about it, because sometimes if you're not in it, you can't properly describe it, like most things. Of course, like we will not be talking in this series about the lower aspects of sex, like the material ones, right, or the physical ones agnostically and so erotically separated from the spiritual ones that also would be realistic in that regard. So sex would just be, in that sense, a very specific but also secondary aspect that wouldn't lead us anywhere, right? On the contrary, when you study eros in a traditional sense, things open really to a different dimension when religiously understood. When we approach metaphysics, one could always tell you, but this is sort of unreal. It does not exist. It's just Santa Claus. It's just like, whatever. Well, that's not really how beliefs work, like how fate works, how what we do every day works. Every day we wake up without even understanding why it happens. We don't know why we exist. We do not know what consciousness is. We don't know where life comes from. We have literally zero idea how to calculate mathematically even, I don't know, drinking a glass of water, but we do it, right? So how unreal is that, right? It's a concept that doesn't mean anything, right? Wanting to go back to the essentials, to the fundamentals, to the absolute, seems the most noble enterprise that a human being can pursue, right? And along the way, you'll surely learn a lot that will improve yourself. For this reason, sex was essentially emphasized overly just in the, again, mechanical aspect of essentially propagandizing how cool it is to get laid, detached from any other, from the same humanity, actually from the same fallen nature of humanity. So eliminating the good, even, say putting the wheat and the chaff all together and simply trashing the entire sexual experience altogether in the worst possible way, right, for what it can be, potentially, and amazing. So there are, of course, like in the more sentimental expressions of passion and emotion, also from a literary point of view, in a cultural point of view, some sort of, nice things, right? You can appreciate them, you can experience them, you can use them to approach the thing, right? When I was little, I was fixated with Robin Hood and Lady Mary from the Disney cartoon. Already at that age, I was like 4, I found something particularly wrong in the idea of stealing the rich to give the poor, but the cartoon was cute enough, and objectively I hoped so much to be Robin Hood so that I could hug and kiss Lady Mary. There is something in the archetype, in fairy tales, in like very beautiful, like, I don't know, cartoons. Like I watched, like when I was a kid, there were lots of sort of Japanese anime kind of, but you see, they were darker at the time, they were more realistic, they were showing you death, love, violence, right? And those, they impressed you. Like also the Disney cartoons actually were pretty dark in many ways. If you look at Snow White, man, that's dark. But I mean, very dark together with other classics. But you see, those sort of woke up within you some sort of awareness of the power of emotions. I mean, that's why you love watching those, right? That's why you love to think that you will have your own wife, why you will think you have your family, why you want things to go the right way. Just think about what most people from our generation have become. There are same stats that tell us that we don't have sex, that we have a terrible sentimental life, that there are divorces everywhere, that people don't get married even anymore. It's terrible, right? We are the best generation. We're the one of, at least I was born in, probably in the year in which most people were ever born. And so we are the dominant force to some extent. And we're also like the last people that, for example, were grown up with paper and pencil, but also like got into computers pretty early. So we have like a unique range of emotional, sensational bases that can help us to trigger so much of what can be recovered from tradition. And so, of course, poetry, lyrics, romanticism, say the idealized romanticism, are very interesting pathways to the traditional meaning of love. But there are also in many ways, historically in the last 100 years, then there are tales that are much older, and that's why we fortunately treasure a trace of that here and there still, even though everything looks pretty grim right now. We're just looking at a fallen world, right? At a moment in which tradition, in fact, was already disgregating, and even this sort of romanticism, this sensualism, sentimentalism, were a sort of longing, wishful thinking to go back to a time in which these means were used more properly and could really open to a higher dimension. This is what honestly pushes me to talk about this topic. So the profane aspect does not interest us more than much, right? This is unfortunately how modern men and women familiarize with sex. It's just sort of more squalid material and unfulfilling one. That's also most of the sex that sort of the psychologists and sexologists talk about. Like, I was actually just yesterday, out of curiosity, checking for anyone talking about sexuology on YouTube, and unfortunately there is. And I watched, like, I went against my own principles, and I watched something like 5 minutes. I don't say the title of what it was. It was nothing particularly. It wasn't explaining how to do anything for that matter. It was just telling how to deal with children that ask parents uncomfortable questions. And it was like sort of the dumbest, childlike. In fact, I explain you the ABC of how to be an intellectually functional human being, pretending that I'm actually telling you anything about sex. Well, I would like this series of mine instead to be the complete demolition of all this abject, right, disgusting and repulsive state of almost subhuman decadence that we have. That there is not really much of a subhuman yes, that there is the animal, but say in general for humans the last step is self-annihilation at this point. And to perhaps let someone in the continuous spiraling down of the moral standards at some point that there was a world in which we still believed in these things, and I think that's very important to talk about. And so when we look at the deeper meanings of love in general, and so even in the raw physical act that embodies and communicates that love, an act that, in fact, as we were saying before, was described as also at some point as a multiple and monstrous being, right? Something that can really lead to so many different outcomes, including the ones I was talking about before. Because you have a superpower, a power to create a new life, right? Or simply allowing you to live more beyond your own body and sort of continuing your existence through that. And that's only the beginning of that life, and you can't twist it so much just in the context it was conceived. And in this sense, like, there is almost, in fact, like, as we've seen, the downside of it, right? It's as if men and women were engaged in this humiliation and sacrifice of everything that is actually beautiful in potential within themselves, right? If it is that raw and sort of devoid of any actual moral dimension. So it's easy at the same time to simply think, okay, but this is a very personal thing to me. Like, I have in mind what you say, I went through it, whatever. But in this sense, like, it's just my thing. Like, I feel it more strongly, emotionally, etc. So why are you coming here to tell me about this? Like, what is that you're actually talking about? What is this higher level? What is this almost hermetic promise that you're presenting? Well, of course, it will take some time before explaining it. So if you're interested, I only ask you to bear with me, nothing more. As you know, I like to take my time to explain things well, and unfortunately, I know many people don't have that inclination. They want everything immediately. This is exactly the same problem with sex, and so learning how to be patient sometimes is really useful in life. So many, but the problem that I just highlighted is actually deeper than it seems, because I think, especially for women, that this inner experiences are felt to a degree that may really seem like absolute, encompassing, right, to a degree that seem to subjectively real, to be entrusted, in fact, to something else apparently unknown that claims an absolute toll to it, and or at least goes beyond the same often hurt feelings that a person may have. Now, that's another important side of the story, of course, but that's exactly what we're trying to, not to heal, but to explain why it's not exactly the most useful one to go through, right? To presume that, right, holds in itself all the meaning. It doesn't, right? Our existence largely doesn't, and that's to the higher metaphysical realm that we should really look at. And for our fortune, the realm of eros did not begin today, with Schwerpunkt's video on the topic. When you look at history, the same aforementioned ethnology, religious studies, mystery traditions, folklore, mythology, well, these are all very clear and often comfortingly one in revealing various forms of eros and sexual experiences that, again, varied with different outcome, like in terms of positive and negative, but that are in this sense acknowledged and embracing this deeper dimension, in spite of all the danger that must there be in it, by the way, not only. So this is quite fascinating. And as we were saying before, the psychological and physiological dimension taken just as two monads, maybe overlapping, but still actually gets surpassed. Right? This is what we will be focusing the most. And all these fields, by the way, agree, right, in emphasizing the importance of this aspect itself. We are fairly well documented, after all, across history, different civilizations, in making us aware of the true belief in the metaphysical dimension of sex, right? This is definitely not a trivial concept. It's definitely no joke, right? This enormous traditional mass of knowledge tells us that there is something essential, absolute, complete in it. It's rather looking at us, as always, we have to find a problem. It's our world, it's how we have degenerated, it's this atrophy, right, that has leveled love to an extent that basically can't be that cheap and sort of flattened and exchanged for something else. It's just something that happens, right? People have relationships and then break up and then restart. They post garbage on Instagram and then, to show off with other people and for their comforting their insecurities. They claim to fall in love and then magically fall out of love and they don't give a damn and they just sleep with another person. And their miserable life of not nearly even remotely accomplished people socially or personally or culturally goes downhill, and they complain that the world is fucked up, and then except they are completely phobic, paranoid, paralyzed psychologically, and you can't even treat them as functional thinking beings if you even dare doing something maybe nice to them. No, Schwerpunkt has not been hurt by anyone in this way. I'm actually pretty ruthless, and I get pretty intolerant of such behavior, or at least kind of nice. I give chances, but I'm also a bit picky, telling the truth. So what about reviving this traditional knowledge? Well, of course, this seems necessary, if anything, for a matter of survival. If we don't want to be extinguished, or at least we want to procreate people that have this more likely predisposition to be more sensitive to this traditional knowledge, we must really integrate, almost like passing from differential to integral in mathematics. It's unlikely that the ancient forms of eros, often sacred or initiatory, were simply novelties at the time. Of course, there was a great process behind that as well. It's also unlikely, however, that these experiences were also misapplied, for example, in ways for which they would have been ill-suited, even in a theoretical sense, meaning that we have to understand why people in history behaved in ways that, for example, today we wouldn't find particularly acceptable, morally speaking. But there is also, again, a broader context, and you have to understand that and how, again, it got declined. There is also a process, definitely, of degradation, of impoverishment, of also obscuration of this. As we pointed out, we don't even have too much doctrinal about that, right? This flattening towards materiality is really predominant with men and women. People sometimes delude themselves that more backwards people, just because they nominally think that they're following some traditional principle, have the palest idea of what that is supposed to mean. A decadent system is definitely not one or that can produce that, right? Actually, the West is in many ways the place where certain trends are of, say, moral degeneration seem through the media sort of more pronounced, but at the same time, the reason why our civilization was so successful was also the way we treated love. And then when there is too much of that, there is an imbalance, and people give it for granted. Of course, you have the situation for which you don't even know what it means anymore, simply because you're spoiled, but it comes from a condition of superiority, not of inferiority. Never mistake that, right? And there are, of course, lots of people in our world that, is conventionally speaking, are pretty, good people. Sentimentally speaking, they treat other people decently, and they are faithful, and they know what commitment is. So on this, I don't feel like it's of course, that the broader landscape is horrifying, but let's say, again, if you have to find some positivity, there is. It's not unknown. It's not just as bad as for example, the level of education. But we're not far from that either. There is, in fact, something about love here that stands out a bit as an exception. I mean, it's as if the dignity of its mystery wasn't diminished, even if, say, exercised by dumb and irresponsible people. Or at least, of course, it is diminished to some degree, but this seems like in playing catch, like, where is fire, right? That's, what around this specific act, there is such a strong call to power that even the most oblivious, the most obnubilated by the burden of sin, can see some redeeming aspect. And this is all one with love. That's why love is that sort of powerful as well. It has that incredible capacity to shake off the chains of any sort of, like, making you feel as if you were reborn, and following like a path, like undertaking a mission, really, that you have to accomplish at the cost of your own life as well. And there are naturally also other barriers in this, like sex cannot quite be simply experimented like in a laboratory, right? You can't sort of make too many surveys on it, like, I don't know, going to people's bedrooms and, you know, interviewing them while they're involved. It's definitely something that has all these layers around. You can't simply see, and in part, actually, the meaning of love, as we'll see, is this most sacred sancta sanctorum, enshrined really into all like the meaning of the universe. And so it's something so precious and beautiful that appears such also to the more inexperienced, right? After all, everybody, like especially when they're very young, they can fall in love in ways that absolutely, like, again, are devastating, even though you perfectly know that likely the person you fall in love with will not even be anything. Like, you're more for you in your life, like it's more like an idea of love at that point catches all ourselves. But especially for this, it shows how sort of imperative its necessity is for anyone. Another layer that, however, is really a barrier is, in fact, understanding how potential, profound, and often unconscious aspects of eros, the aspects of eros are to understand, and so separating it from how non-exceptional and mundane it has become in our world for us to even think to appreciate. Again, lewd jokes, terrible stories like gossiping, you know, the vulgarity of people have objectively ruined an immense dimension of the more natural approach to this that normally happened. I don't know, when you were very young, you were married that early, and then you went on, you know, making children, working. There were jokes. There was some sort of, you know, perverted dimension always looming, etc. The most vulgar culture, the lower estates, have always been heavily involved in this. Recently made a video about the Fablio, and so we've seen there what they are about. All right. There is a mundane level that, however, is also the one of natural passion. And in this sense, what is again the gateway to a metaphysical dimension seems to appear in the fact that love brings you to instinctively act, right? Even in certain gestures, in certain actions that are meant to express that love in a genuine way, right? It's difficult to argue, even in some of the worst cases, that there's literally no love in some sexual acts, right? To some extent, it doesn't matter how twisted they can be. Like at a deeper level, the call to it, as rigid as it can be sometimes, really a very serious criminal way and more, is still dictated by a tiny bit of that. It's definitely a mystery as well. It's something that transcends, in fact, the pretty weird restrictions we've placed on consent, right? You cannot have love literally if you think that this is subordinated literally to anything, including consent, which of course doesn't mean that you should go out there raping people. It simply means that there's a dimension to it that at some point does not ask and sort of also exploits. It is absolutely normal. Like in every relationship, there is some unbalancement for which there's someone who's in charge and another who sort of gets that, right? And this is more naturally, of course, like a dominant man and a passive woman. And there is a very specific reason for that we'll again explore in whenever. I don't know how often I will be uploading stuff about this topic. In any case, right? And there is a sense, of course, of love that we chase in the sense of, remember the phrase, the expression true love, right? Or understanding truly what this selfless devotion to someone really is, etc. Like the idea is that we believe in our world, in our stories, in our literature, etc., that there is such a thing, like true love that is apparently, like, traditionally doesn't really mean much, because true love is just God's. It's the absolute one that dominates the universe. But there is definitely a call to those who have, especially I think, really fallen in love for real, chemically, and so not like those 23 years old that have to say, I have to fall in love, I don't know what it is now, maybe I think I understand what it is. It means you have never fallen in love, which is also sad to a degree. It's also devastating for that matter to experience it, but like many people are scared. Like I've noticed, especially among women, like the sense of like there is so much lack of confidence because men are total children, to be honest. And so that actually stimulates also the devouring mother in women. So just infantilizing anyone and becoming actually just intolerant to anything. I don't know. There is a very specific need of leadership that manhood embodies. But in any case, we understand how there is almost an initiatic value in the sense of love. And so the idea is that even though we live in the crowds of the masses bearing human faces, there are actually very few true men in it. And this is actually the same principle that goes along with the absolute idea of virility that we have seen actually being connected with the idea of taming, again, the female spirit of victory and transcending to heavenly glory because of God's grace bestowed on the victorious warrior. So this is not just, I don't know, there are a few true men that, however, are just a bunch of, I will try to avoid sexist expressions, even though I'm pretty, there's a side of mine that somehow leans towards that direction. But, I mean, you cannot be a true man, say, in bed and then out there just being a total wreck, right? That's means just maybe a prostitute at that point, like some sort of gigolo or whatever, but not really what society and politics defines as a true man, even as a warrior, as a fighter. So there are very few people who, according to our tradition, will truly comprehend the meaning of love. How little, basically sanctity, how little, how the infinitesimal limit towards the God, the truth. And this may sound disappointing, because it is. And again, this is not about love. This is about, as I understand, our entire human condition. This has nothing to do with stats, with, I don't know, let's see who understands love or whatever, or reality. This has to do with your willingness to accept the world as we have conventionally accepted to pretend to know it is nothing like we think it is, right? Even thinking can be debated in this sense. And of course we will concentrate on the relations between sexes and we will definitely observe how this higher metaphysical realm is actually the normality of sex, right? That what happens here on Earth is something just terribly shallower, and of course there is just a possibility to come that close to a certain point, to that height, and some say, you can reach it, but who are you, all right, to do so? It seems that from millennia this capacity has been lost. It's really difficult to, again, simply say, okay, this is all of what I wanted to say. Actually, it feels like I haven't explained anything. In fact, that's the actual problem. It's a very big and complex issue, but I hope that we will be seeing this better in some other circumstance over time, together with all the other content. Don't watch just this stuff or another. Like, it's important to look at everything, because if you don't get that this stems from history, and you sectarily separate it from topics that you somehow are not interested in, it means that you completely failed in understanding why any of this is important, right? So I will definitely try to remind you of that. I hope that you appreciate my choice. I think it's an interesting topic. It's pretty new to our content, but I think it's pretty fitting at this point, especially after having talked so much about history of religions and more. I think it's an interesting expansion on Schwerpunkt. Very well, for today I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.